If you ask anyone, 2020 has been a tumultuous year, as the coronavirus pandemic has taken over the headlines and, in a way, changed everything about our lives. Because of the interconnectivity of most of the global economy, the aviation industry has been one of the heaviest hit, with the aviation demand downturn during 2020, very much dictating the activities and the decisions of most industry stakeholders. With that said, we'll take a look at the year 2020 and how the coronavirus pandemic has affected global aviation, especially the aviation industry in the Asia Pacific. Along with the COVID pandemic, I'll also highlight some of the other stories that made headlines during the past year. As mentioned before, the coronavirus pandemic has very much dictated 2020, with the pandemic starting with the first infections reported in Wuhan, China. In response, and amid the fears, airlines suspended flights to China, though that was just the beginning. As the virus spread, more countries were seeing flight suspensions, especially South Korea, which was one of the first countries outside of China to be seeing a spike in infections earlier this year. Fast forward to 2020, we all know the headlines that the virus has spread very much throughout the world, affecting many people's travel plans and the plans of airlines had for this year. Flights that would normally carry passengers would be shifted to providing cargo carriage for items such as personal protective equipment like face masks, and empty seats due to regulations for social distancing were implemented. The scale of the groundings of much of the global aviation industry's fleet was on an unprecedented scale, though the only exception of these flights being operated were for cargo or repatriation purposes. Not being able to serve the bread and butter of passenger traffic, a lot of airlines were struggling, and those who were already struggling financially prior to this pandemic have only seen their situations become much worse. As countries imposed more travel restrictions, those who were able to travel were subject to being quarantined at the destination country. For many travelers, with the health concerns, travel restrictions, and it just being so inconvenient to make any trips unless necessary, the aviation industry has incurred billions of dollars in costs due to flight cancellations and refunds, and planes being sent to long-term storage. Beyond the airlines, the losses was also felt with a downturn in tourism arrivals, and once busy air hubs were mostly empty. With much of the world's airline fleet grounded, another note to make was the accelerated decline of the super jumbo, specifically the Boeing 747 and A380s, which was already in the process, but given the current times where airlines are looking to restructure their businesses, it is seen as a way to restructure their costs. The ongoing restructuring among airlines as they strive to survive the pandemic for the future has seen some casualties amongst the airlines. Among the notable carriers that we've seen and operations this year was Nok Scoot in Thailand and AirAsia Japan. The biggest name of them all was Cathay Dragon, the subsidiary of the Cathay Pacific Group. If they weren't shut down, some airlines have been seeing their problems further exacerbated from years prior, such as Malaysia Airlines and Thai Airways, with Thai Airways entering bankruptcy proceedings. The pandemic has also affected major acquisitions and mergers that were planned in 2020, and we've seen this in South Korea with the failed acquisitions of Asiana by the Hyundai Development Corporation and Jeju Air's planned acquisition of rival E-Star Jet. There's right now a lot of uncertainty with E-Star Jet, but in terms of Asiana, there is hope for the airline in its bid to find a buyer, as its main South Korean rival Korean Air is eyeing to buy the airline's majority stake, setting up for what could be a large supercarrier based in South Korea. While 2020 was a rough year for most of the airlines around the world, the bright spots did come from some of the startup airlines in Asia, specifically with Zip Air Tokyo and especially Taiwan-based Starlux Airlines, which both commenced operations earlier this year. After launching its maiden flights in January, Starlux suspended its services during the COVID pandemic in the spring. However, in terms of good news, they did commence services again by the summer and since have announced some new routes, including those to Japan, and recently filed for its first flights to the United States, specifically to the city of Los Angeles, which the airline plans to launch in 2022. Zip Air Tokyo also had a rough start, having to pivot to cargo services during the summer when it previously planned to start its flights during that time. The new budget subsidiary of Japan Airlines is ending 2020 on a better note, operating flights to Bangkok, Seoul, and Honolulu, Hawaii. While the COVID-19 pandemic has taken over the headlines, on the back of the minds, the biggest story of 2019, the Boeing 737 MAX groundings, continued to be a part of the global aviation industry discussions. After casting a dark cloud over the Boeing company over the scrutiny over the aircraft, the US FAA has given the go-ahead for the 737 MAX-8 and -9 to return to the skies. As for the aircraft making up of the global aviation fleet, it also has been a rough year for both Boeing and Airbus, as airlines are anticipating a decline in air traffic demand and are in the process, to their dismay, of renegotiating current aircraft orders. Despite that, there has been two major notable aircraft orders made from within the Asia Pacific, specifically ANA's order for additional Boeing 787s and Starlux Airlines' decision to add the Airbus A330neos to its fleet. These were just some of the big stories that happened in 2020 from within the global aviation industry and within the Asia Pacific. As the year 2020 closes and we welcome 2021, aviation stakeholders are likely to be more cautious next year. Given the current state of the pandemic and the constantly changing travel restrictions, it hasn't been a stable situation for airlines and the aviation industry. The challenge going forward will be how the world will balance health and safety needs while promoting an environment that would help reopen international travel for the masses. What's your take on the aviation situation of 2020 and how do you see things going forward in 2021? Besides the COVID pandemic, which do you think was the most interesting stories of 2020? Also, I hope everyone had a very Merry Christmas and I wish everybody a Happy New Year. Stay safe, thanks again for watching, and have a great day.